Everybody needs to hear the handbook of human ownership, okay? A couple things I learned. I'm not done with, I'm an hour and 12 minutes into it, but that last 30 minutes of this so far has been amazing. The whole thing's amazing, but it's really beyond my expectation, my wildest expectations, and that's saying a lot. Couple of things I learned so far. All right, so highlights and also, pointers for me to think about. Number one, he may talk about this because, again, I'm not finished with it yet, but everybody's human. So in addition to everything he's saying, which I happen to agree with 100%, and I mean that, like 100%. Even if I don't have all the evidence for some of the earlier things I haven't researched because I wasn't aware of them before, I'd like to research them and still be able to say that. But it all ties together very, very well. Here's what I would add as an addendum to everything he said so far in the handbook of human ownership. He being Stefan. Fuck YouTube for not showing me his whole name. I'm not going to change my view screen. Well, if the ruling class is human too, which I've always been not skeptical, but I guess wondering how that works, and now I understand how it works. Not what you think at all. Not what I would have thought, which is why because I didn't think it made any sense how it's presented, because it really probably isn't actually that way. That's the reason, because I'm sensible. But they need to be reined in too. He may go into this actually in another video or maybe later in this one. Here's how you control them. You control them by allowing them to have the illusion that they're helping people, just like politicians. Because very few people are actually sadistic, okay, by nature. You can actually measure it, and this has been controversial because it could maybe be more thoroughly explained now in my mind than it was before, but it's more prevalent among certain classes and ethnic groups than it is amongst others. So everyone's afraid to talk about it because they'll be accused of being racist for pointing out a fact, or at least a statistic that's true. There may be, again, more explanation for this particular statistic than I knew about before, because I downplayed the effect of childhood travesty and abuse a lot, just because that was my perspective, and maybe I'm wrong. So if I'm wrong, that could explain some of this. But certain groups have they have a higher degree of low frontal lobe activity, which is inexorably tied to criminal behavior, because our frontal lobes are required for us to express empathy or experience. Rather is the difference between a sociopath and a non-sociopath. We need our frontal lobes to be active in order to experience empathy, because empathy is a profound and advanced concept that human beings possess by and large, because it was required for our survival. It took probably hundreds of thousands of years. Actually, no, fuck that. It took millions of years through our advancements from the lower primal ranks to actually formulate that due to environmental conditions. And I'm stepping on a lot of what I believe for a long time by saying this, and rightfully so. Environmental conditions are literally everything. They're the whole reason. I know this sounds crazy, but listen to this. Say, this is like somebody going from an agnostic to, a theist or a deist. Let's call it a deist, because that's, better. I was a geneticist. I had thought for a long time and believed genetics were responsible, because here's a good argument, for human behavior. Look at a cat. Do you have to teach the cat how to clean itself? That's a behavior. How does that get written into your genes is beyond me, but it is written, because they don't need to see another cat do it to learn it, whereas humans need monkey see, monkey do. Whatever the reasons are for those differences, I can't go into right now, because I don't know that much scientifically, but I can observe, and that's scientific in of itself too, that my cat knows how to clean herself. Those licking motions, the patterns, It's called instinct. Instinct is a behavior that's ingrained into your genetic sequence somehow. It still eludes me how that could possibly work. That's so crazy. It's almost like they're being, the alternative explanation would be like God's telling them to do it. Almost. It's almost at that level where like an external deity would have to be feeding you this information, basically. It's kind of crazy. But we know that there has to be a natural explanation for this because everything is natural in this world because it's nature. My point about that was, now I understand the contradiction. If I'm such a firm believer, based on these observations and others, in the power of genetics in determining people's behavior, where did the genetic inclinations come from? Those codes that incite such behaviors, where did they come from? They came from adapting to the environment. Whoa. Oh, wow. So that totally threw my whole worldview out right there. Nuts, right? Nuts. I'm still, yeah. That's, that's a conversion. I just converted in my mind, and it took whatever the length of that moment when I confronted this information and was and had to confront my own belief and deemed it invalid. It was that moment in time. That's all it took for me to be converted. That's all it ever should take for someone to convert their ideas about something, is being wrong and realizing it immediately and adapting thought accordingly. So I have. Boom. Not even overnight. Didn't even take that long. Over moment. So, yes, environment is literally... So my point, my long-winded but necessary for bringing that up is this. If environment is everything, that includes, why, and this is why you should really listen, because it explains a lot about how this has happened. Most of these platitudes that are actually benign to begin with, they just get corrupted, and this has too. So the whole excuse of, because I've always hated this cultural cop-out of, man, we was raised in the hood. I'm just pointing to this group because this is what's happening now. I could have pointed to another group in the past, but, basically trying to explain their bad behavior by things that happened to them and never changing it. Like, just staying in that rut so they can continue doing it, and that's the only reason. And it's been so transparent to me since I was 9 years old that I just rejected it at that early age. Again, well, what does that prove to me? That proves to me that things that happened to you as a kid, things that you come to conclusions about, I'm 30 years old now, have affected me until this day. You see? Whoa, another revelation right there. Amazing. So, what I'm open to entertaining now as a proposition, whereas I wasn't before, is that possibly, and this could probably be measured easily, sufferers of childhood abuse or neglect, or especially aggressive abuse, probably have lower frontal lobe activity. I don't know. If this is not true, well, my contention falls apart, which is fine, because I'll just, fall back on what I believed before. But I'm willing to entertain this notion, and I'd like to research and have it studied by somebody and so we can find out the truth. What's the truth? If that is true, what he talks about a lot are the ways in which... So I wanted to record this for things I've learned, right? So here's another thing. And by learned, I don't mean I'm repeating what he said. What I mean by learned is me having a new idea. That's why I have to record this and not just say, go watch the video. Because I'm having new ideas based on what I've learned, based on what I've been informed of. Because to me, information dispensal and learning are different things. It's kind of a new idea I've been having recently, and that's cool. So so it's about what I learned, and here's some information dispensal first, which I already knew. So I knew half of the equation, so I always thought, I knew the consequence but not the cause. So the consequence of women entering the workforce en masse suddenly is that they're not available to raise their children, really, and in an economic, that's one, so they have to outsource, obviously, to these daycare facilities. And then they think that they're, it's a favor to them. The thing that they were doing before, again, this is the reason that I think, who said it? I'll just say Thomas Jefferson. I could be wrong. I saw it recently that every society is only one generation away from enslavement and losing their freedom. You can look it up if you want. I don't remember who said it, but it's really important to understand that this is how this has happened. So the last generation exploded in radical feminism. All right, bullshit about empowerment, carrots being dangled in front of their slapped around faces, which is understandable at the time, right? I understand that. But this isn't the solution. So now they think it's a big favor and has even become part of the feminist manifesto that women should have. So if it's such a good idea my argument is this then. If it's such a good idea to be spending time with your kids, maybe you should do that all the full time. Don't you think? If it's really good, I don't think you can have too much of a good thing. Okay? Because the only reason now you become, so this is something I already thought of myself on my own. The reason that both parents have to work now is because women entered the workforce. It's because of that, actually. Now, I've come to understand some other aspects which make it actually larger than just that reason. That's a consequence of it. I found out the reasons possibly behind it. I'm pretty convinced. Well, they're probably researchable. You can look it up and find out. And I'll relate those details to you in a minute. They've also caused inflation, which is, so here's the order of operations, or how it pans out. Okay, more people entering the workforce necessarily causes inflation because there's more market activity. So if you suddenly have a bunch of people earning an income, they're going to want to spend it, of course. And then prices are going to go up based on the laws of supply and demand and nothing else. No other manipulation or anything like that. And then all of a sudden we wake up one day and our money's worth like half of what it was 50 years ago. I mean, you kidding me? It's worth 9% of what it was 100 years ago. So do the math. It's about 50% of what it was 50 years ago. Every 100 years it loses 100% of its value. Kinda. It's an asymptote. Look that up. So one day they wake up and all of a sudden they're basically feeling enslaved to having to go to work. So they start petitioning for maternity leave when they don't realize the previous generation is what caused the problem. So that's the stuff I already had internalized myself. Add this on top of it. He states that radical feminism specifically, which I would classify as maintaining these notions of basic self-destruction, that radical feminism, not only themselves but the human species as well eventually, radical feminism was actually government funded. Now he didn't specify United States. He's maybe an Irish or Scottish, I think he's Irish, I'm not sure. I don't want to be wrong about that. I haven't looked up anything else about him. But he made the claim that radical feminism was funded by, some type of income redistribution originating from government. Wow. Why would they do, or the ruling class? Maybe that's what he meant. Whoever gave money to those organizations, more than they gave money to other ones, even if it was just, even if that would have been just to cover their tracks, maybe they should have actually. But whoever, enthusiastically from a higher class sponsored these radical feminist doctrines, we want to look at them and find out what their motivations are and where maybe they are today and how it's worked out for them. Because here's the way it's worked out for us. And he brought this up, another, factual dispersal. What I learned is going to come up very, very soon. So please keep listening. Continue listening to this. Well, if you want to look at it from a more conspiratorial, doesn't mean it's not valid, but it is a conspiracy. If you want to look at it from a more conspiratorial top-down instead of bottom-up, I talked about the bottom-up problems that have been created out of illusions of empowerment. Let's talk about the top-down interest, because there is one. There is an incentive from the top, and that's taxation. That makes it way more clear, doesn't it? Because taxation causes inflation anyway. It causes inflation because the money you earn becomes worth less the more you tax your labor. It causes inflation of labor, and that's a little bit more complicated, but it's it's part of the same staircase. It's just the next step up, which is that I'll explain it real quick because this is now something I have learned. I'm learning this as I'm thinking about it right now too, even, and it's really, really cool. Because I don't want to just talk about monetary inflation. Labor inflation takes place when you raise taxes, because now the time, which is, hey, market economies, free market economies are supposed to be about an exchange between your time and what you get in return is something of value. It's a barter system that's consistent because there's a consistent means of exchange, and that's fine. That's called money. So that's the way it's supposed to work. But when you start taxing those people's that person's time with an income tax, you're punishing them for doing their job, and you're making their time less valuable. Now, there's certainly, this guy would probably take off on the psychological impacts of that, which are definitely playing into the hands of anybody who's trying to oppress a group of people. Sure, I'll grant that. I'll grant that preemptively. But I want to talk about the monetary impact. So the monetary impact is that then they start demanding higher wages. Now, this is wrapping back into my own philosophy on how to fix things that really will work, and I want you to hear it. So this group then, problem created by government, okay, which is income taxation. So we might not need government ultimately, is the point of his message, and I agree. I'll just say it right now, and I'll tell you why, every single reason if you want, for that. But here's one. So then this group that a government has created a problem for starts petitioning the government to solve it, just like always, by increasing the minimum wage, which is the most asinine concept ever, and it's retarded, and I'll tell you why. It defeats the purpose. Here's the order of events again for this one. So, okay, minimum wage, I'm explaining why it defeats the purpose. I could tell you in one sentence, but I don't want to get off track here. So, inflation defeats the purpose because the next step minimum wage defeats its own purpose because the next step after they've gotten their minimum wage increase is that inflation takes hold. Always. And there's some people who dispute this. I've listened to their arguments, but it's simply just too reasonable and logical to arrive at any other conclusion that this happens, because I can explain why it happens now in like 5 minutes at the most, which I won't. I'll explain it in 2 minutes. The reason it happens is because employers at that point now can hire less people, period. If you just want to stop there, it'll explain everything. Let's just stop there. Let's try it. Let's try it out. They can hire less people. What does that do? 2 things. It puts more people on the unemployment roll if they are, can qualify for it even these days. You never know. It's gotten that bad. And it puts them in the food stamp line. If we're talking about people who don't have any qualms about going for broke. Sorry. So what does that then have an impact in? It has an impact, and really, fiscally speaking, this is true. It has an impact on the resources that the government has, right? Because where's that money coming from? Income redistribution, that managed by the government / ruling class, whatever it is. But the government literally, manages our money in that way to take it from everybody or from specific groups more than others and redistribute it to quote everybody, but really more specific groups than others in that case also. And I'm not going to even talk about that right now, but it's true. I worked there. And they have rules in California, for instance, about illegal aliens qualifying for Medi-Cal at age of 18, but not actual American citizens. I've experienced that, but I'm not going to get off on that tangent right now. So the government's budget is naturally threatened by, and I don't think this is even by design, it just happens because it's the consequence of what's going on. The government's budget gets squeezed because more people are signing up for their welfare programs, whatever it is, unemployment or, which isn't really welfare, you pay for it, but that's okay. Or it's another form of income redistribution, but everyone might need it, so I'm not totally opposed. Or welfare. just straight up, food stamps and EBT/cash aid, okay, which should be voluntary. I think they get more money. People would get more money voluntarily than they get doing taxation, ironically. If you think about it, it's probably true. So they start losing money. So when the government starts losing money, that's the only time anything really happens. When the government starts losing money or changes, when the government starts losing money, that's the only time anything really matters. What does the government have to do to recoup? And this is the third step now. What does the government have to do to recoup that money? They have to start raising taxes. Raising them on anything. If you raise it on income, it's going to inflate the cost of labor. Boom. Which will do what? As we just discussed about 5 or 6 minutes ago. I'm right on time, aren't I? I did it in 5 minutes. What will that precipitate? Another petition. Oh, yes. Isn't this wonderful? Inflation, which will inflation. That's what it does. That's what it does. We already talked about this, okay, of the monetary system. Higher taxes, okay, now will incentivize the laborers to do what? Request another minimum wage hike, which means the employer can now probably has to actually at this point downsize and lay people off. And where do they go? To the welfare line. And what does that do to the government's budget? It shrinks it because it costs money to pay for that, and especially when it's expanding exponentially because to pay for it they have to raise taxes again. And when they raise taxes, people's wages are lessened by that because they can either afford to buy less because maybe you raise the sales tax. Okay, you can punish them on that end, or they're earning less because you're deciding to go ahead and raise the income tax instead. How do states can even have income taxes? I don't know. It isn't constitutional. We had to pass a constitutional amendment for the federal government to do it. I could be wrong about this, but I don't think there's anything about the states having the right to do it. I could be wrong. If there isn't, we can overturn this overnight, basically. But anyway, so either they hit you with a sales tax or an income tax. And what happens then? You can't afford to buy as much. That's called inflation. Okay? Duh. It can happen either way. Okay, so if you can't afford to buy as much, what do? You need another raise. You know what this does? This is exactly the only main reason why the middle class is shrinking. Because less people are able to stay in the workforce. It's not even enter it anymore. People are worried about losing their jobs now. So what does that do? It deepens the gap, as people like to say, widens the gap, as they so love to recite that expression and that cliche. It widens the gap so that there's more people on the payroll of the few people who are left to work. And the few people who left to work necessarily need to get paid more in order to be taxed enough to pay for the, quote, unproductive, which nowadays really just includes a lot of middle class people at this point. I don't even think there's a stigma about it anymore. It's a necessity. It was a necessity in California before I left to be on that shit, and since I moved, I haven't touched it. Like a drug. It's fucking addictive, okay? I wasn't addicted. I hated it, but for general population, in a financial way, it becomes addictive. It's literally addictive when you have to be on it to survive. That's what it means. That's why the middle class is shrinking. That's the main reason. That's all you have to do. So, in a sense, now this may not is they're creating. So, in a sense, what's being arisen out of this. It's so simple and easy to talk about this, isn't it? It's really common. It's really plain knowledge at this point. What arises out of this is what you could call, an upper class, just because they're getting paid for but more nominally, but relative to inflation, it's really what the middle class. It's even less than what the middle class was in the 1950s. Everybody, if you actually look at the numbers, it's tangibly less. It's relatively less. Isn't that amazing? So they're actually making less money than their predecessors. Everyone else doesn't even have a job. They're having to be on welfare. And this is all coming from a solution that the government originally proposed for poverty. Well, here's something else this fine gentleman brought up during the presentation, and probably mention it again later. Well, who's controlling the poor? Stefan Molyneux. So Molyneux. Sounds like a French name. Maybe one of his parents is French and he's raised in Britain. I don't know. What does this do at this point? The fuck was I just talking? Oh. So who's controlling the poor? The government is. Their housing, their food, even their transportation, because you can get, maybe you don't know this, subsidies for free bus tickets, etc., or lowered fares, whatever it is. The social services offices in various states and counties will possibly give you like a bus card redemption or something like that, free bus rides so now when you have like the government, whatever government it is, you have a government controlling the lives of just deciding who gets what directly. That's like enslavement. And I don't really like to use the word, because to me slavery has I only looked at the aspect of physical, coercion, which I'm okay with sticking to that for that word, because I don't want to overblow anything. But maybe there's another word that could better just serfdom. At that point, it's not even serfdom, because they can't own land. They don't even own their own land. The government does in the projects. Now, people come out of this system being what? They come out of the system being more or less criminal. What are the statistics? Poverty poverty. The statistics are, and so are the social justice arguments, are that poverty begets criminal behavior. Violence. Poverty begets violence. Why? Because people are desperate to survive. It's animal nature. Come on. Plants will do this too, even. So why are we creating more poverty then? Is it so there could be an overthrow of the current system? I don't know. This thing is really comprehensive, so what I'm about to say is beyond the scope of what I've talked about during this particular recording. But is it so they can usher in whatever the next stage is of empowerment for themselves over the rest of everybody else in the human population, because they know that this system is going to collapse like every other one has, and there's been several iterations of this. He goes over in depth. It makes sense. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them for now. Is it so they can actually usher in their own demise on paper, basically declare bankruptcy, and they have a plan for how to enslave us next? Is that what it is? If you want to use the term enslave, they have a plan for how to control everybody later, like whatever the next cycle is of this, the next iteration. Is that really what's going on? Like, was Karl Marx, who maybe, in my opinion, he was a shill for these people. You can hear all about the religion of the state if you want. It's in this too. But he pointed out that every cycle of history, so he was wrong in blaming capitalism, actually, because that's not it. That's not the issue here. The issue is domination. Give me a second. But he may have correctly pointed out that it does go from cycle to cycle, which is also why he's wrong in his conclusion, actually. Obviously, if it's going from cycle to cycle to cycle, capitalism's not the last one. The current corporatism, as I like to think of it, that we have now, is not the last one. It's going to keep happening. The fundamental problem, which he perfected with his formula for solution, by the way, for the record, he perfected the very problem, is human enslavement and domination by other humans, i.e. the Soviet Union and China, and especially North Korea. Who does it most? Who's done it most since the inception of this doctrine? The socialist state, which has moved in here too, in our democracy. It's a nice backdoor entrance. Soft totalitarianism. He uses that term a lot, and I like that. So we went from direct totalitarianism to soft totalitarianism, so people don't realize it. He talks a lot about the impact of, like, he's pretending to give advice to one of these ruling class people, and he, quote unquote, I'm still skeptical of it myself, but that's okay. For now, it's okay. He's giving him advice, and he likes to refer to this idea of, demotivation because of realizing you're being bad for production. And it's interesting. So we want to keep this knowledge as far away from the people who are being manipulated by it as possible. But the people who are doing the manipulating are also human. They still have those inveterate traits which make us susceptible, to empowerment by and over others. So even the ones, that are empowered over others, they still have their masters. There's a master. There's one master, and it doesn't have a name. I have to spray my kitty because she's doing something bad. There has to be just one, because it's hierarchical, right? That's how it works. That's how hierarchies work, guys. So maybe one way, and I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to bring it up again because it was my original point. One way, it's going to get sprayed. No, one way of seducing the population of the ruling class into continuing to do this is to instill an idea, if they're maybe being used as shills too, this idea that so they can defend themselves, that what they're doing is for everybody's own good. Which isn't that the motto of the nanny state? You think this is a coincidence? It's not one. That's the motto of the nanny state, because that's how they control everybody, is by deciding what's best for them. Now, we can go back to libertarianism and basic Austrian economic principle arguments, and let's do that for a moment, because it's on the earth level. It's not up in the clouds where we've been. This is down to earth concepts right here, right now. Okay? Ask yourself the simple question: how good is the government at managing its own money generally? Well, if it was that good at managing money, they wouldn't need to raise taxes all the time, would they? They're only raising taxes because they actually suck at it, taking on projects they can't afford and can't pay for. So if they're that bad at managing their own money, how good do you think they're going to be at managing other people's? Simple. I have just completely invalidated that argument, like in one sentence. 2, it's that simple. They're going to be worse at it. Come on. They're going to be worse at doing the thing they claim to know how to do best. Stupid. It's just stupid. So stop giving them that power. Stop asking them for help. That's something we can do right now, is to stop asking them for help for everything, and and empower ourselves and break a few laws if we have to, because we're going to have to, because there's so many now that don't deserve to be. They don't deserve to be laws because they're unjust for victimless crimes, etc. Many other things. Paying income tax. Okay, bullshit. That's a bullshit. At least they modified the Constitution and gave us that courtesy. We got to reach around on that one. But in every other area, that's not happening. Tabitha? No. You know what you're doing is wrong. Stop. Damn. Sorry. Knock over all my shit. We're going to have to engage in civil disobedience seriously, because it's the only way to fight this. I don't care. Take me to jail. Inciting a riot. What is that? Probation nowadays, because you got so many fucking laws and crimes that murderers are getting out early. That's what you're leading our society to protect us. Is this how you're protecting us? Is you're the only way that you're helping us ever in any arena or scenario. The only manner in which you're helping us is by exacerbating the same problem. That goes for anything the government touches that the private sector can't do better. There are some things the government does very well, okay? Few. But there are things that require monopoly by their nature, and that's okay. For now, I'm okay with that, because maybe we need that still. And don't even call it government, just call it public sanctioned monopoly. Just, that's what it is. That's what it is. That's all it is. Well, if it's such a good monopoly, they should be able to afford to pay their own bills, which in a sense makes it a private government system, don't you think? And don't you think people would volunteer and want to pay for fire and police support brutality? I mean, police, services. I would. You know, if I got a riot, or maybe one I incited myself, but if I've got a riot outside, maybe, and they're throwing bricks and I can't stop them myself, and I don't want to commit a crime in the process of an actual criminal, shut up, of actual criminal nature, well, I might want to call the police in that situation and not have to worry about paying a bill afterwards for their enormous amounts of time that they have to spend filling out all the fucking government paperwork. Again, it even it even harms the sheep herders in doing their fucking jobs, if you can believe that. So I want them to be on the payroll, like on retainer, any emergency service like that. It makes sense for everyone. So I believe people would pay for that. There's no sense in not paying for it. We all have an incentive to pay for it. It'll work. It has to. I mean, it's silly to think that it wouldn't. And here's how you prove it. Collective, there's already volunteer stations and volunteer fire stations like up north here, where I live. I encountered one during the drive up, and thought it was so cool to hear their little bell or siren to call all the guys. I was like, damn, that is so quaint. I've never heard that in my life. Amazing. They're already doing it, guys. They're already wanting to do it. Like, they want to do it more than, you know what I mean? The other thing. They want it. So for a metropolitan area, that might not be such a great solution, but that's why you get into collective payment arrangements, which is all government is anyway. That's all government does. I mean, on its foundation, monetarily, is it redistributes income. So, like, it is a collective payment arrangement. It's just not one that we volunteered to. I believe in volunteering. I believe in volition and having free will, like God does. I believe the same way God does. Okay, like, is that wrong? So, if you embrace the idea of freedom, it's the antithesis of a monopoly that is not sanctioned by the people whom it's supposed to be serving. It's the antithesis of democracy. Antithesis. Well, I'm going to keep going. I'm not done yet. I'm just going to give you a minute to digest that. I'm going to make this recording save properly before I move on, just to be sure, because who'd want to lose this great material? Alright, it's saved. Awesome. This is officially the Citizen Shane Manifesto now, so it's going to go on as long as it needs to go on. So we were just talking about, I was just talking about to you guys and gals, and what is it? Non-binary somethings. I was talking about gender-neutral people. I was talking about so stupid. Sorry, but I just think that's fucking bullshit. It's fucking bullshit. It's probably stemming from another root cause that has something to do with a way in which we're being manipulated, okay? Just think about it, maybe, for a while. Just meditate on that. For like a day. That's a challenge. Think outside the box. Question your own preconcept. Come on, question your notions, people. I might be wrong, maybe I know what I'm telling you isn't true, but you have to find it out for yourself to actually believe it and understand it. Understanding, something else I learned recently, is more important than knowing. Knowing isn't everything. Understanding what you can know is what matters. And let's understand this now. So we were just talking about volunteer fire stations and so forth, collective payment arrangements for areas in which that wouldn't be feasible, either financially or practically. Fine. Collective, so voluntary, right? That's what this comes down to ultimately, is being voluntary. And again, all this latter half stuff I've been talking about, latter portion of this recording, I mentioned that I was reducing it to basic Austrian economic principles, okay? Simple things. You learn it in Econ 101 at school, probably, and don't remember when you get to the voting booth, unfortunately. Well, I'm here to remind you today about how these things work, because we have to change them before this generation succumbs to complete oppression. Governments are collective payment arrangements. So I want to talk about the lie of social contract. The lie of social contract is basically the same, has not changed at all since the introduction of the concept of original sin. It's our version of original sin. You were born into the system, therefore you owe the system. Fuck that. Fuck that. I can't say for sure whether I had a decision in coming here, but I know it wasn't for that reason. If I did, wouldn't have been. If I'm retaining my soul through this whole process, it wouldn't have been for that reason. Okay, I promise you that. I promise you. These things have to be voluntary. They have to be voluntary by, at the behest of each successive generation for us to retain our liberties. If it is true that the human population is only one generation away from seeing its freedom disintegrate, okay, then every generation has to sign up for social contract. Yay. Let's hear it. Consecutively. Forever. Always. That's my platform, is that every generation has to sign up for collective or for social contract voluntarily. This isn't hard. That's the good news about this. It's actually easier. It's easier than watching the dollar collapse. It's easier than our whole infrastructure falling apart because of a solar flare and trying to prevent that and all that shit. It's just easier. It's easier than anything. Okay? It's the easiest thing you can do, actually. It's the easiest thing you can do. Now, I am going to possibly get into the specifics of how to undermine the system we have in order to bring this about, and it'll consist of a few small steps that aren't even difficult, and probably if a bunch of government officials aren't listening to this who are currently in power, they won't even know it's happening. Like, we're going to cook the lobster slowly like they've been doing to us for thousands of years, okay? Alright, it's our turn. It's our turn to undermine them. Let's do it, because they're undermining us. It's called survival and self-defense. This is a fight we're waging, a war even, if you want to call it that. We're waging this war out of self-defense, okay? It's domestic terrorism the government is waging on its citizens. Here's how you do it. So here's how I would start. And you can take this idea. I don't care. I want someone to do this. If it's not me, maybe it can be, because now you'll know it came from me. But if it's not me, I give you permission. I don't care. I'm spreading the good news here. It's the gospel. It's the new gospel of how to govern ourselves. It's the new gospel of liberty here. The new gospel of freedom. Here it is. Okay. You're going to like this. Here's how we cook their lobster slowly. Cook the monster slowly. We calmly and ingenuously petition and introduce bills related to this premise. And the premise is as follows. Instead of raising minimum wage by, say, $1, we will only elect candidates, only, while we still can vote. All right? Think about that. Seriously. We'll threaten them this way. We'll only elect candidates who are willing to go along with this platform. And that is to actually decrease income tax by the same amount they would otherwise have raised the minimum wage. Now this does everything, but it solves it solves not only all that other stuff, but primarily it solves the 3-step process by which inflation is happening. Because number one, here's how it defeats the first step. People won't need to charge their employers more money to get a raise. It's like magic. Like the Mandrake mechanism looks like magic, but it's not in our interest for that to be happening. This is magic too. That is in our interest for it to be happening. And why is it in our interest for it to be happening? Because the only party being damaged, quote, damaged by this, is a government that we're supposed to be in charge and control of electing in the first place. Its duty is to serve us to begin with, so actually it's their duty to allow this to happen. Great. Works out perfect, right? So what that does, in addition to not charging, so therefore if the employer isn't charged for this, call it a subsidy, the invisible subsidy. Just like inflation is their invisible tax, here's the antithesis, is an invisible subsidy. We impose it on them. They love subsidy anyway. The employer isn't being charged for this. It comes out of basically what the government's trying to extract from you. It comes out from... Shut up! It comes out from what the government's... It comes out of what the government's trying to extract from you instead, and poison your infrastructure with, and your children's futures with, which is inflation instead. It's taking that away. Their ability and power to do that by not having this dollar, this extra dollar from everybody that they took away. They stole it. We're just reclaiming it. Think about it that way if you have to. It's the easiest way to God, I'm obsessive about vocabulary. Sorry. It's my manifesto after all. It's the only way to reconcile this is to take back what's been stolen from us. So we do it slowly so they don't know anything's up. But here's what's up. So once you do that, people get comfortable with the idea. So, okay, I'll say that right now. That's okay. I'll do it right now. People start getting comfortable with the idea that they can forcibly reclaim liberties that the government's taken away from them already, forcibly get them back. Okay, that's great. That's healthy for this whole operation. So let's start there. It empowers us. But here's how else it solves the other problems. The government then will not get that dollar for spending on social services, which has to happen when inflation rises. And how does inflation happen? We already talked about this, but one of the ways in which inflation happens is when the government has to raise taxes in order to pay for this welfare state. And in order to pay for it, a lot of times they have to print more money. Also, I didn't mention that before. Printing more money isn't the nature of inflation now. It's the essence of how inflation occurs, is money being created that wasn't there before, devaluing the rest of it. And the first people who spend it, which this gentleman also talked about, the first people who spend this money having all the advantage. This video is so going to get banned from YouTube. Stop it, Tabitha. Do I have to spank you? Jesus fucking Christ. I'm just sitting here talking to you guys, and she's trying to escape, all the time. There's nothing to escape from. I'm not letting her outside right now. I'm not giving her everything she wants all the time. I'm the master. I'm the ruling class in this family. Alright? Because I'm human. That's okay. That's nature. That's fine with me. Whew. I feel like pausing, but I can't because on my tablet there's a little glitch that'll happen where it'll mess up my the speed and make me sound like I don't feel like trying to correct it to my natural tone later, so I'll just maybe edit out the silence when I put this together. I'm not going to edit out anything else. You'll hear the cat meowing. It'll add character to this, I think. So that's okay too. Back to it. So they will no longer have to print money to save their own skin because their budgets are being squeezed by the welfare state that they created to address the problem of poverty in the first place and people not having jobs, which they're now contributing to as a result of their way of fixing their own debt crisis, which they're just exacerbating again by printing more money, because the way they print money is by borrowing it from somebody else. Ugh. Namely the Fed. Not going there right now, but we will eventually. You'll understand it. So without them having to print money to pay for the welfare state, which is precipitated by people losing their jobs because other people who are able to retain them have gotten an artificial wage increase that the employer is paying for, well, guess what happens now? Guess what happens now? In addition to solving the problem of inflation, which is putting everyone out of business, essentially, in addition to that, instead of layoffs, with that dollar coming from the government instead of the employer, who's done nothing wrong, who's not taken anyone's liberties away, is just trying to actually live the American dream and walk the straight line, okay, in this scenario, okay? Instead of punishing them, we're taking that dollar back from a government that's stolen it, essentially. Stolen it from everybody. under our noses, in our interest, stolen it. And I use interest as an incidental pun there, by the way. Interest. Why should we punish the employer? It's not even fair. But here's the benefit for everybody else. Now, instead of layoffs, they can afford to hire more people. Why? Because you're able to spend more money because you have that raise that you needed. And your spending more money actually stimulates the economy. And when you stimulate the economy, you create demand. And when you create demand, which, by the way, classically defined and fundamentally defined as the ability and willingness to pay, willingness and ability, think about that. When you have that ability and willingness to pay, what does that do? Well, it encourages other people to jump into the market. We don't even have to... It encourages other people, just never mind, think about it. We'll tell you later. We encourage other people to then fill that. We encourage other people to fill that need and that demand that's been created. And guess what? More people get hired. More people even get hired exponentially till we have essentially 100% by all those who are capable of working employment. That's how we attain it. It's that easy. I mean, elusive, isn't it? That it should be this easy, but it is. It really is. All righteous things are. Oh. Why do you think water travels down the path of least resistance? It's holy water. That's the reason. So this is righteous, so therefore it's easy to solve. The lies and the deceiving and the deception, that's what's hard. That's what's hard to do, actually. It's much harder. Isn't this great? So the solution to attaining full employment isn't going to war. It's not going to war anymore. It's giving people their money back. Whoa! What a concept. Giving people their money back that was stolen. Oh, wow. Here's why we need to do this now, because if we don't do this now, we need to get to them first before the system collapses and becomes something even worse. Far more nefarious, far more, whatever it's going to be intricate to fool us more because we're getting educated, we're evolving socially, and that's good. And that's fine. It's kind of natural too. It's also natural. Everything is natural. And that's good because we're going to evolve into this instead. I hope so. I promise you. And I hope. As I hope. What else happens as a result of this? Okay, here's what else is going to happen as a result of this. Remember how I was talking about the volunteer collective payment arrangement thing? Volunteer fire departments and so forth, and in major cities or metropolitan areas, collective payment arrangements to keep people on retainer for doing their job. They're directly answerable to the people they're serving, so there's no conflict of interest anymore. Ends police brutality. Like almost overnight. Think about that. There's no fireman brutality. They're doing fine however they're paid. So that's going to be good also. But, stay the same probably and be better maybe. I hope, I can't argue that right now. I don't really know, but whatever. Make sure they get the money that they need, and they'll have a way to figure that out from past history. So whatever it is, it's going to be less than what the government's charging. I guarantee you that. So there's only a few exceptions to this rule. I want to talk about this for a minute because these are where monopolies are okay. This social contract then, right? This voluntary social contract, these monopolies have to be approved by us. And they have to be accepted by the people they're supposed to be serving to exist. This precipitates the voluntary taxation mechanism of running a government. Us, we the people, directly managing our affairs and theirs too for public servants. Imagine that. A world in which the taxpayer actually controls which taxes he wants to pay, which services he believes he's entitled to, etc., etc., etc. Such a system would do marvelous things in every aspect of our lives. I'll mention just a few. It'll fix everything. People will be inclined to talk more about politics. Even if we were just get to that point now, it could help with the voter education issue, right? And being an informed voter, I should say, being more informed. if you're inclined to discuss with other people, well, I'd like to see the EPA's, cost-benefit report this quarter and figure out how much I want to give them. If you believe in that cause, great, go for it, just for now, before there's no longer a need. This is how the government withers away, Karl Marx. It doesn't wither away by deciding that it's no longer necessary, because it's always going to find ways to validate its own existence and perpetuate its own existence. It's not going to wither away by itself. We have to do it. This is how we do it. So before it starts completely withering away, at least maybe people will start caring more about how the government's spending the money. The reason people don't care is because it's being forced out of their pocket. That's why government sucks, because we're all people, and I want to bring it down back to that level again. We're all still people, and that's okay, because it's about us, dude. It's about us. It's so simple. So if people actually had an incentive to care more, that way you give them that incentive to care is when they're actually in control of how their money's being spent, and it'll all work better. Think about it. You're not seeing results. You're not seeing it's results driven. It's meritocratic. I'm not even going to try. But it's merit based, right? So if they're not doing their job, they should get fired, just like you. Why should they have special rules? So let's jump away from that for a moment, back to the voluntary or approved monopolistic, system. So in that system, things like mail. I'm a big believer in mail. I think it's an amazing, and Adam Carolla kind of made me start thinking about this, because he was totally right. He's like, you're telling me I only have to pay, 38 cents or whatever it is to mail this thing, like this, you're going to drive all the way to Wisconsin from California or whatever to mail this piece of, to give somebody my love letter? If that was, a one-to-one thing, it would never work. But it's a great system. I like having mail. Try to keep it around, maybe. But only if you all like it, too, because it's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, right? Nor would I want to. Because I can't. Anyway. So I don't want to. Anyway. So for things like the post office, for instance, you can't use it if you're not carrying the card. And here's what I mean by that. You got to have some proof that you've signed up for social contract, right? You can't just assume that because other people have, you can leech off of, their collective payment arrangement. That's not fair. That's not fair. And man is much more inclined to help his fellow man when he's not being manipulated into believing they're stealing from him, which is actually true, but it's happening through governmental redistribution of your wealth. That's how it's happening, but we're led to believe that other groups are profiteering off of us that are within our same society. You all people on the left want to preach about unity and collectivism and caring. This is where it comes from, is people being free. End of story. So it'll probably turn out that people will actually be more inclined to even help more, because they have more to help with to begin with. That's one factor. They have more to help other people with because they're getting that, that extra dollar an hour that they want back from what they're being taxed already. Crazy, isn't it? Until we're at zero income tax. We just have to keep reintroducing the bill and showing all the evidence for why it's helping, which will be there and be real for a change, and keep reducing it until it's zero, until that we can amend the Constitution. That's what has to happen, and abolish that tax. That's number 2 of my platform right there, abolishing that income tax. And I've just explained to you how that's possible. It's very possible. Once the income tax is abolished, this is like the solution for everything book. Once the income tax is abolished, the government will have to start finally being answerable. This current system we have, start being answerable to the people. Once they start having to be answerable to the people, what do you think is next? What do you think? They're going to fail at most of the things they're doing because they suck so hard at it. We can finally fire them and get them out of office and burn their office if we want to, because it'll have to be removed because they can't pay for the rent anymore. So fuck them. Fuck them. Fuck them all, except for the ones that you want to pay for, you approve of, whatever it is. Let us govern ourselves for once. This is how. Don't you see? It's that simple. This is how. Once those few services are retained that are actually necessary, like maybe water management, that's actually fair, stuff like that. I have other ideas about that I'm not going to go into, like California splitting in half. That should happen on its own eventually. Give it to Mexico. I don't care. Maybe the lower half. They're all living there anyway, so what's the difference? Mexifornia. It was supposed to be their land anyway, so I'm just agreeing with the leftist hippies. What do you want? Agreeing with La Raza. God. That's fine. Maybe we'll be able to agree on some more things as a society too. You unity people, think about that for a moment here. It's not going to be people at each other's throats because they're being robbed by each other forcibly. We're being forced to steal from each other, because this guy made another really interesting point. A person who's given stolen goods will never ever again complain about theft. There you go. God, managing our human nature better, like building this around what we are and not lying, not denying, but embracing it instead. That's platform number 3, okay? That's pillar number 3 of this. Embrace human nature. It's how we can structure our government around it in a way that best serves us. Duh. Not just part of us, but all of us. Easy. Ruling class gets thrown out the window at that point. I'm telling you. Overnight. Like, that's how it'll happen. It's that easy, because they're a bunch of pussies. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They're not going to come trying to control everybody with a bunch of weapons and shit, all these shit like that themselves, or private military patrols. They won't be able to do that when we have our gun rights back. Will they? Will they? Yeah, because the ATF is going to fucking get fired too. God damn it, the South will fire them all by themselves. They'll stop paying them. Why do you want to pay for that? DEA will probably be next. National Security Administration, gone. Goodbye, servants. Okay? You're our servants. That's really what was intended by all of this. Okay, I don't think it was this another way to... They found a way to corrupt it, but it's the right idea still. It's still the right idea. We just have to begin exercising it correctly again, and faithfully. So they'll probably be the next to go. Man, you guys are fucking gone. You're out, NSA. We're not going to be paying for their massive data centers to keep on spying on us for the government to imprison us someday. God. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I feel disappointed. Being reminded that that's where we're at still, but take heart. Doesn't have to be for long. If we can do this, as soon as you listen to this. Start doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is, like I said, only voting for candidates who are going to lower even just the state income tax to begin with by the same amount as they're proposing to raise minimum wage. And when this is finally broken by the media and everybody hears this is an option, actually, we have a choice in this, they're going to sign on. So it'll just be like a snowball effect at that point, which is good. It'll be a domino effect. So now I'm just predicting the future, which is utopian at this point, because we're controlling it now. We, the people. So when we're in charge of finally, variety until we reach equilibrium again, which is better than watching the whole system crash, until this is how the invisible hand is supposed to work anyway. Until we reach equilibrium again, like several more government agencies are probably going to be fired. And that's fine, because that frees up those public sector employees to come back and get jobs in the private sector that thankfully is thriving again, where people are in control of their own wealth. Thank God, America. Don't you think, consider versus an NSA police state? Don't you prefer this instead? Those are our choices currently. They're the only ones we have. I choose this over that anytime. So I'm not going to dwell on that because it's not positive or constructive. So again, predicting the future. So until we reach that economic equilibrium where finally all the money they've been stealing with it from us, either through the income tax, or through inflation, which is both, until we reach that equilibrium again where they're actually providing us services which correspond to how much we're paying them for those services, it becomes free market actually at that point. in an Adam Smith way, you know what I mean? Not this corporatism stuff where they get subsidized too. No more of that. No more subsidies. This is the only subsidy we're going to get, is giving us our money back. It's not a subsidy. We can call it one if it helps them think it's a good idea. I don't care. But I don't think we'll need to. It's not necessary. So we get our money back. And until we finally reconcile this, over expenditure on behalf of the federal government for waging wars and aerosol containers and everything else that they're doing, and the Oceanographic and Geographical Association, which may actually be one of the few to remain. Once we finally abolish then we can move on to abolishing the Federal Reserve Bank, and that. What do you want, baby? You want attention, or are you just whining again? I can't tell. We can then abolish the Federal Reserve Bank. And, at this point, it may not even be necessary because things will be going so well. Shut the fuck up. We'll be so economically better off at this point. Yeah, shut up. You can go whine in the closet. We will be so better off economically at this point. We wouldn't even think that this is necessary, and it may not be, but I'm going to run this by you one last time, okay? That's the last head of the dragon. Oh, and it's going to put on a happy face for you. It's going to give you the puppy dog eyes and say, "Don't hurt me," because it's the last tendril of this giant multi-headed serpent beast. It's the last way for it to reproduce. It's the last way. Oh God, I'm thinking of this now. I need to really, convey it profoundly to you, because it's the last head of the dragon, guys. That's it. Is going to be the Federal Reserve Bank. If we can get around to it, it needs to be abolished. The reason is, you can make money out of gold, but you can't make gold out of money. Gold is money. Representations of it are not. They're just representations of money. Okay? So that's not fiat currency anymore. That is, I would call whatever Bitcoin, whatever, call it virtual currency. I mean, that's fine. Whatever. But think about this. So at this point, there wouldn't even, if everything goes according to plan, at this point, there wouldn't even be like a treasury, really, because it won't be that necessary. We can just directly pay these administrations and so forth. Here's where I think monopoly on violence will need to remain in place, not exactly as it is necessarily, but just still there. The reason is, we may not ultimately need it as a species eventually, but we still need it right now until this idea spreads to other countries. And we get, it's that powerful. And we finally have world peace. That's the goal. This is the World Peace Manifesto, too. So before this idea spreads to these other countries are going to be jealous of what we're doing, and they may also perceive it as a weakness that the federal government is being abolished by the people. They may think it's time to come in and attack, and we'll need to maintain a militaristic force to protect us against that. And which at this point I think would be much more accountable to the people, having seen what's happened to the rest of the federal government at this point, the rest of the beast. And I think they'll be much more amenable to upholding and maintaining our constitutional rights. But if they aren't, we got to have our guns for that reason. Because this could be like, I don't think it would, but another way for a desperation of this dying monster to lash out. We got to watch out for that too. Until this idea spreads to every other country in the world that has any way of doing us harm without us being able to defend ourselves basically on our own with paramilitary groups and everything like that, that'll probably spring up here in a healthy way, of course. Kind of what the Second Amendment, the rest of it is saying about well-regulated militias. That's what they'll be. Well-regulated doesn't mean it's regulated by the government. That's a notion that was superimposed upon our understanding based on later events than when it was written. So forget that interpretation. Fuck that interpretation. it's absolutely disingenuous. In addition to being, fallatioed. Yeah, that's right. They're jerking you around. Sorry, predicting the future takes like a few minutes sometimes. So that's where I was. So we may not even need a big military to protect ourselves anymore. There's a lot of people who know how to fly planes. A lot of pilots can do jet. Jet pilots can probably understand how to be a fighter jet pilot. Eventually, someday, whatever. We'll figure it out. At that point, we'll be able to, because we're actually talking. I think this may be an employer. Oh, it is. Hey, Chris.
Good morning.
What's up, buddy? How are you?
Doing well. Just getting word from up there at Sunnyside. They would love for you to come in on the 8th at 11 a.m. if possible.
Okay, so we're going to go with when the hiring manager gets back?
Yeah, so they want to kind of have you meet with the team and then meet with the hiring manager, kind of just all one day, so you're not having to commute up there.
Okay, that's perfect. That's fine.
And that way we can kind of just knock everything out of the park in one visit, basically. So.
That's good. That works for me. Yeah. I was afraid yesterday we missed each other because it was too late, because maybe Amy had to go home and couldn't schedule the interview earlier, but this works too.
Okay.
Yeah, this works.
Perfect, yeah. I called you yesterday and your voicemail was full, or what?
Oh, is that what? Oh, I'm sorry. I've been meaning to empty it. My bad.
No worries. So I was just in your voicemail. You were saying if I left a message, but I did shoot you an email and stuff yesterday as well.
I think that happened because you're calling me on which I plan to empty it anyway. But you're calling me on my. Are you maybe calling me on my direct cell phone number? And fine, cat, get out of my room. I have a Google Voice number I usually use that I put on my resume, because that never. But that's okay. So I didn't miss out on anything then, right?
No,
okay.
Nothing at all. So when I talked to her yesterday, she was basically saying, "Hey, let me confirm the times for Tuesday. Let's do it all on Tuesday, and I'll let you know tomorrow morning." So
beautiful.
Cool. I'll send this back over that you're good for 11 a.m.
Yes, sir.
You still remember the address, how to get there, and everything?
Yeah. I got it written down in Bothell and everything. I actually.
I'll send the directions just in case.
Sure.
Just to double check. So. It never hurts. And then, do you have any questions before you go in?
I always just like to ask, even though I probably know the answer. I don't mind business professional at all. I have the clothes for it. But when I went to the Xerox interview, I was like enormously overdressed and hot and sweaty, and I was like bad. I still got the job, and I just wasn't in my prime mode. You know what I mean? So I have a little bit. I have a nice little what's it called? I have a nice little it's a gray coat. There's a name for the material. I forget what it is, but it fits me very well. And, I can wear dress pants with that. But, you tell me, do you want me to go in with the full, blazer on and the dress pants and everything like that? Like a suit, or?
I would go more business casual and everything.
Okay.
They're really laid back up there with dress code. So, obviously, business casual is going to be still overdressed for...
Okay.
Everything up there, but always tell everybody, interview-wise, business casual, dress shirt, slacks, dress shoes, that's perfectly fine. You can wear a tie if you'd like to. There's no necessarily need to.
I think I will. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and feel free to wear a tie if you'd like, and then for obviously first day stuff, always say business casual. Unless,
right on.
Just for first day, and then you kind of get the feel of, hey, this is what you can wear, kind of thing. So, I guess their dress code up there is kind of more relaxed.
That's cool. So I'll just stand up a little elevated above everyone else, but not so much that I'm you know what I mean, over the top.
Man, you don't want to be coming in a tuxedo like on the Brothers.
No, oh man, I totally forgot about that. That's so funny. Oh man, I feel like I must have missed it. I need to watch that scene again. You just made me do that. A tuxedo.
Perfect. So that's all set in stone for 11. I'll shoot you an email that has everything on it and stuff. And we'll kind of go from there.
Cool, and this frees me up to open up my schedule with the Gigs for You organization that's hired me to play this weekend. I can now take off the restrictions I had and let them know I'm pretty much going to be available except for that day for like the next week, in case something comes up and they want me to play some more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So it's a win-win. Oh, and on the resume front, do you think they want to see my education? Because I have enough credits to have a college degree, but I studied a lot of different areas of things to try and just make the most of my education, I guess. Should I wasn't in advanced placement English in high school, and I can mention that I have my high school diploma. Do you want me to put that stuff on the resume just in case when I bring it in or send it to you or whatever, or do they not care?
I would just leave it as is right now.
Okay.
They're impressed by the resume, what they saw already. Obviously, she jumped all over it and
Mhm.
moved forward, so I would just leave it as is and kind of just play it off. If they ask me questions about that, obviously you can speak upon that, but definitely I would just, leave it as is.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. So, cool.
Awesome.
Well, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a call this weekend. I'll be around town. So,
Okay.
you have my cell phone number and the emails and everything.
Oh, and hey, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and then have a good weekend. Enjoy playing.
Thanks, and I'll let you know what the time is and where it is because it's in the downtown area, and if you're around downtown Seattle and you happen to be there and you want to stop by and see, I'd be fine with that, so you know.
All right, cool. Yeah, let me know. You said what day is it? Saturday?
Yeah, it's between 4:30 and 6:30 at Westlake Park. So if you want to just come by, you don't even have to, make me nervous and say hi if you don't want to, but I don't care. But if you want to just come by and listen and have an ice cream cone or something, I'll be there.
All right, sounds good. Well, yeah, if I'm down in the area, I'll definitely stop by.
All right, cool, man. Well, wish me luck on that, and I'll let you know how it goes, of course, when we talk next, if you don't come by. And I feel good about this, man. I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
Excellent. Perfect. So, we can touch base before you go into the walk-in and whatnot on Tuesday.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll plan on that then as if nothing else.
All right, sounds good, man.
All right. Well, you have a good weekend too, sir, and you just made my weekend, so thanks for that. And I'll talk.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later. Thanks. All right. Bye. Woo! There you go, everybody. There you go. I wanted you to hear that. It's part of this. It's part of this. And so I want everyone to have those abilities and opportunities to be hired like that. That's really what my goal is amongst everything else, is that I think everyone should have that opportunity. Let's get on to the subject of protecting and securing our elderly and our mentally disabled, okay? Because the government's been trying to take over this, and they're obviously failing, and we're not going to have Social Security if things keep going the way they are when I'm, coming up for retirement.